Good morning and Shabbat Shalom and welcome. I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein. This is Valley Beth Shalom Torah study for a Shabbos morning, and I'm joined this morning by my dear friend Rabbi Marc Gellman from Florida. Good morning, Marc.
Good morning, Shabbat Shalom, Ed.
Right, this morning we add our prayers to prayers of folks all over the country for Marc's wife, Betty, and we hope that she's healthy and well. She's had a surgery this week, and we pray that she comes home strong and is able to enjoy many, many sweet moments with all of us in the years to come. So Marc, please accept all of our prayers as you think about Betty, and we hope that she comes home healthy, well, and whole and strong. This morning we're reading Parshat Vayishlach, which is the third in the trilogy of stories about Father Jacob. Jacob, of course, is terribly important to us because we are his namesake. We carry his name. We are Bnei Yisrael. We are his direct descendants. And so the stories of Jacob are our stories. They're really the spiritual autobiography of the Jewish people. And the story begins and it ends with an angelic or a vision moment. It begins when Jacob runs away from home, running away from his brother's vindictive vendetta, rather, to kill him after he has stolen the birthright and the blessing. And he sees a ladder from earth to heaven and from heaven to earth, in which angels are coming up and down. And God stands with him and says, "You'll be protected." And then along the journey, Jacob meets each of the characters that will shape him as a human being. He meets Rachel, the girl of his love, of his heart, and he meets Leah, the girl of his sense of responsibility and family. He meets his uncle Laban, who is even more manipulative than he is. And he meets the God of his ancestors. And slowly he begins to develop into a character, into a soul. We see Jacob grow a soul. At the end of last week's Torah portion, God says it's time to go home. After 21 years away, it's time to go home. And so Jacob and the family begin the journey home. And home means Esau, the brother he left behind, the mess in the family that he left behind, the lies, the stealing, the taking, the grasping, the heel that he was as when we left him last. And this week's Torah portion begins with the drama of meeting his brother. He takes the family, crosses over the river Yavok, and then he himself goes back to the other side of the river to remain alone during the night. Torah says an ish, a man, a character, a somebody, came and wrestled with him all night. And in the morning, offers him a blessing, a name change, a wound on his thigh. And that initiates the beginning of the climax of the story as he meets his brother and tries to find some rapprochement with his brother. Who is that stranger who wrestles with Jacob? Who is the stranger who wrestles with each of us? Who is the stranger who comes the night before in the cold, dark, lonely night of the soul to meet Jacob and to help him discover the self that he will present before his brother? There's a whole bunch of wonderful interpretation of this and what the story means. But let's begin by exploring that question. Marc, who is the one who wrestles with Father Jacob?
Well, every Jewish kid I know, and Ed, you can chime in on this if this happened to you, but every one of us who went to religious school got imprinted with the idea that this is a story of Jacob wrestling with an angel, right? It's the story of Jacob wrestling with an angel. It's only when you actually read the words that you realize, wait a minute, that's not what the story says. And it reminds me of the cautionary phrase of the German Bible scholar Hermann Gunkel, who said, we read the Torah with sacred inattention. And that's our job, I think, on this Torah study, is to help people bring sacred attention to each individual word in the Torah, because in one way or another, they're messages from God. So what we have here is a story which says straight out, Vayeyavek ish imo ad alot hashachar. And Jacob wrestled with a man until dawn was breaking. So my theory about this, and it again surprises me that the commentarial tradition doesn't pick this up at all is that it was Esau who attacked him. This is the border of Esau. Jacob has a sense that Esau is prowling around. That's why he takes his whole family across the river. And then he goes back and he's left alone. And that's when the wrestling match occurs, because he realizes Esau's coming to try to kill me. And if at least his camp can get away, that would be good. But he might die at the hand of his brother, who's, 21 years ago, had his birthright stolen by his brother and his mother. So to me, the simple and obvious first possibility is that it's Esau who attacks him. This also fits with the fact that at dawn, they had to stop wrestling. The guy who attacks Jacob says, look, dawn is breaking, I have to leave. Because, the first rule of the desert is you offer hospitality to anyone who comes in from the desert, anyone, and you feed them. And then if you have issues with them, you deal with it there. But so the idea that Esau had attacked someone who came in from the desert would have blackened his name forever. Secondly, the idea that he had attacked his brother would have blackened his name. So what we have here is Esau needs to remain anonymous. He can't be seen as attacking his brother. And that's why when dawn comes up and he would be identified as Esau, the prince of Seir, he has to get out of there. And that's the story totally fits. And then later, when Jacob sees him, he says, seeing you is like seeing the face of God. And I think that's the ambiguity in the story, that, as you know, in Midrash, it's davar acher, one version, another version. So when I wrote this originally for Moment Magazine, I made two versions. One, it was an angel who may have been Satan trying to stop the covenant. And the other was Esau. Either way, it's a fascinating story. And at the end, Jacob and Esau are reconciled, just the way Ishmael and Isaac were reconciled at the funeral of Abraham. These two guys are reconciled at the Jabbok River. And they're reconciled in a way that I think guys understand. And that is, sometimes you need to fight. Sometimes you need to punch your brother in the face, and then he needs to punch you back. And then you wrestle around and you break everything in your bedroom. And then finally, when it's over, you say, oh, okay, that's done. And you don't need to fight anymore. So those are the senses I have, that he got attacked by his brother, and that it was the essential moment of reconciliation between Jacob and Esau.
It's a wonderful reading. It's a very interesting reading. I tend to go a different direction.
Okay.
Rashi, the great medieval commentator, tries to read Torah for the pshat, for the simplest meaning of the text. But even Rashi sometimes says, Ein hamikra hazeh omer ela darsheni, that this particular text is so elusive and elusive, that this particular text is so fuzzy. It needs midrash. It's asking us, it's begging us to fill in the gaps. It's begging us to fill in the gaps from our own imagination, our own experience, our own view of the world. And so I offer the midrash, but I offer this with the full knowledge that that's not what the text is saying, that I'm adding in to fill in the gaps. So the gap, the thing to me is, you're right. The two obvious meanings, one is he's wrestling with Esau. And this is a prelude to what's going to happen the next day, because by the next day, and you're so right, by the way, about brothers. I have 3 younger brothers, and we beat the life out of each other.
Yeah.
But the wonderful thing was we're very close now. We're very, very close now. And even when we beat the life out of each other, if anyone was really in trouble from the outside, we would band together incredibly ferociously. There was always a sense of that, you know, we could hurt each other, but you can't touch my brother, you know. But so that's very true. And the other meaning is the angel, because in the morning, his opponent, his wrestling, says, "Let me go. I have to leave." And angels have to leave in the morning, and he gives him a blessing. And I want to suggest something else. I think that, and this is drush, I know, but I think that what this is the Bible's way of trying to give us the notion of what it means to wrestle with your conscience, what it means to wrestle with your inner self. Jung would say what it means to wrestle with your shadow. That in fact, this is the Bible's way of trying to show you a night of tossing and turning, or a night when he is broken internally, that the parts of Jacob are fighting against each other. This is an internal process. The man is coming to terms with what he did as a young man, who he was, the evil he brought into the family, the poison he brought into the family, and that hurts, and it's painful, and it gives you a limp, it gives you a wound in the end, but it's only after confronting it, and this is what's so interesting. Of course, Jacob is the manipulator. He's ish tam, he's smooth, he's slick, he's verbal, he's articulate. He can talk his way out of almost anything. But on this night, there's no talking. It's wrestling. It's, you know, man on man, as it were. This is something very powerful. And wrestling is such an interesting metaphor, because in one, it's a sort of, it's a grappling, it's a struggle. It's also suggestive of love, of a grasping and holding of the other. I mean, love making is a form of wrestling too, in a certain sense. And it's not manipulative. He's not manipulating. Now he has to confront the truth, confront the brother. And what's so wonderful about confronting the brother, of course, just to go one more step, is so the next morning, he divides the camp into two. He puts half of his wives and kids on one side and half of his wives and kids and half of his property, with the theory, this is a crazy strategy, that if one gets attacked, the other will run away. And you fully expect, and he sends messengers ahead to bribe Esau and to butter him up, to flatter him. And you fully expect that it's going to say that Jacob sends the two columns ahead and he went in the back, but he doesn't. He goes in the front and he confronts his brother, and he stands face to face with the brother. And you don't know what's going to happen. It's a beautiful piece of biblical storytelling, because there's suspense. Is Esau going to kill him? And Esau embraces him, and you still don't know what kind of an embrace that is. And then Esau kisses him. And it's not a kiss of death. It's a kiss of reconciliation and wholeness. But the wonderful thing is that they look into each other's faces. They're brothers. They're actually twin brothers. They haven't seen each other for 20 years. And he looks into his brother's face. And even though they're fraternal twins, there's still a resemblance. And this was a time before mirrors were invented. So you look into the other face, you're seeing your own face reflected back. Or you're seeing your own face reflected back 20 years, you know, a lot grayer and older than you were when you last stepped into the story. And that's part of the thing. It's a self-discovery. That's what makes the story of Jacob so remarkable, because in ancient literatures, up until modernity, we don't have a lot of stories about the psychological development of characters. This is a very psychological story. It's a story about a man who grows a soul, a man who discovers what he is and then develops changes, and the dynamic of personality. And of course, the dynamic of personality itself is such an interesting fact, because when we meet people, we tend to think that's what they are. I know Marc Gellman, right? And yet, Marc Gellman isn't Marc Gellman tomorrow. It was Marc Gellman yesterday. We all changing all the time. We're developing. It's a question of in which direction are we going? And you see Father Jacob developing as a soul, And I think that's what makes this story so very interesting. So for me, you're exactly right. The pshat would either have to be Esau or the angel. And I think that the drash of him, this is part of his development as a soul. It's wrestling with himself on the long, dark night of the soul. I think that's how I like to read the story.
That's beautiful. There's another element we should consider here, which I think gives even more support to your midrash, even though ein meshivin al hadarush, we follow the rabbinic view. You don't debate midrash. Halacha, you have to debate, because someone is wrong, someone's right, and the law has to be with one or the other, not with midrash. That's one of the reasons I love midrash. And this other thing we need to consider, Ed, is that all of a sudden we have a name change that isn't a complete name change. When Avram becomes Avraham, he's Avraham from that point on in the Torah. He's never Avram again. When Sarai becomes Sarah, she never goes back to being Sarai. However, as soon as Jacob's name is changed to Israel, one who wrestles with beings divine and human. What's that? That's the Jabbok River. Divine and human, what's that? Esau and the angel. Someone who wrestles with beings divine and human and prevails. So all of a sudden he's Israel. Okay, his name's been changed to Israel. But within a verse, they call him Jacob again. And we have to answer that question. What is the Torah teaching us? Because they weren't fools. They weren't stupid. They understood what they were doing. And what does it mean that in this transformation narrative that you have so often used to such great effect, what does it mean that a man changes his name but not really?
No, I don't think it's changes his name, but not really. I think he changes his name, but there's regression. That it's the change in person.
Not really.
But that he really is Israel. But the change in personality, he regresses, he reverts. You know, he goes back.
The Torah calls him Jacob.
Yeah, I know, but it also calls him Israel. So
yes.
he has Israel in him, but he hasn't reached there yet.
But
Israel is the name of the
Abraham and Sarah.
Because Abraham achieved Abraham and never went back, because his direction is unidirectional. That's what makes him unique and remarkable and completely untouchable. That's what makes him, I can't be Abraham because I can't move in that direction. Same with Sarah. But every one of us, first of all, every one of us who's ever been on a diet knows that there is a quart of ice cream with your name on it in the freezer, no matter how good you are. You know, I've gained and lost 1,000 pounds over my life because change is hard. And we regress and we revert and we go backwards and then we regret it. We do tshuva and we try hard. Israel is the name of his aspiration, who he wants to be, who he could be, but he's not there yet. And the truth is, Marc, his whole life he's not there yet. His whole life he isn't there yet. Right?
Okay. I love that. It fits your narrative and it's beautiful, creative, and wonderful.
And probably wrong, but go ahead.
However,
God bless you.
However, I think there's a davar acher, and this other version is this: no one person can be Israel. No one person can be Israel. Okay. Israel is the name of a nation, not the name of a person. So all Jacob is doing is taking the name and holding it briefly until we get to Exodus and the Moses and the people Israel, the Bnei Israel, are finally Israel. And and that's the reason. And that's why Jacob, is not buried in Egypt. That's why he's not there, because the people who go down are Israel. The people who come up are Israel, but they're a different Israel. And that's the people. So,
but let me
yeah.
push you. Let me push you one more step forward, which I think you'll appreciate. I love that. I think that's a beautiful drasha, but I want to go back and apply my developmental thesis to it. Abraham Joshua Heschel once said that there's no such thing as being human. Being human is always a dynamic, because we're always moving either toward the angelic or toward the animal. It's a dynamic. I would suggest Israel is the same way. I love it. It's the name of a nation, but it's the name of the aspiration of a nation, of the reaching the goal of the nation, of what the nation wants to become. And we spend our whole lives, all of the 4,000 years of our history, trying to live up to that name, and still haven't gotten there. But it's the name of what we're reaching toward. There's something within this culture, within this people, and I think it's beautifully personified in Father Jacob, something which is always pushing us towards something bigger than ourselves, a better sense of ourselves, a more gentle society, more wholesome world, a deeper sense of spirit, a deeper sense of life. There's always this dynamic pushing us forward. That's why we are so ferociously self-critical as a people. Ferociously self-critical as a people. For those of you who've never been to Israel, first of all, you should know that Israel, of all countries, must have a dozen daily newspapers. Now, why does a country of 8 million people need a dozen daily newspapers? Not even that many in New York City. And the answer is because each one has editorials criticizing the country, from the left, from the right, from the socialists, from the capitalists, from the Arab parties, there's just this ferocious sense of expectation, of aspiration, of reaching towards something bigger than ourselves that's deep inside of us. Deep inside of us. We have a whole season of the year when we speak about the things we regret, the sins we've committed. You don't have one holiday during the year which says, we're okay, we're fine, we're good, we're complacent, we're satisfied. We don't say that. We say, I've sinned, I shamti, bagaditi, right? It's an interesting piece of us. So I love your drasha, but I want to go one step further. It's not the name of a nation as it is. It's the name of a nation as it wishes to be. And that's the developmental aspect, the aspirational aspect that is encoded, embodied by Father Jacob. Now, there's another character, though. Let's talk about another character, which I know you've written a lot about, Esau. In some ways, of the two characters, the hero in the story isn't Jacob or Israel. The hero in the story is Esau.
Without a doubt.
Jacob finds out that Esau's coming with 400 men, which can only mean one thing. He's coming with an army to kill him.
Right.
And you don't know until the last minute what Esau's going to do. But when Esau finally speaks, it's a different Esau. It's not the crude, crass, coarse killer of animals and people. It's a man who has found his own peace in the world. And when Jacob says, take all this stuff, all these bribes, Esau says, I don't need it. I have enough. I don't need your blessing anymore. I have enough. Tell me about Esau, Marc. How does Esau find his peace in the world? How does he go from this enraged killer of men and animals that we saw earlier, 20 years later, to a man of substance, a man who is of gravitas, a man who has a place in the world that he's comfortable? Tell me about how Esau changes.
Well, there's a connection we'll get to later when we get to the Joseph story of Esau's wife and how he finds out through Mahalat that what's going on in Jacob's house and with Joseph and the brothers. And he ends up being the salvation of Joseph in this other midrash that I wrote, which we'll deal with in the future. But Esau, I agree, is the hero. And I think there's several reasons for it. First of all, he's had 21 years, actually, of realizing, wait a second, I'm on the land. He's the one who had to cut and run. I've been here. He had to leave. And he became a prince of the land. So the first thing is, he actually wins. Jacob is the one who has to run away. That's the first element. He's feeling confident because on a material level, he won all the cookies and his brother had to leave. Second is, he got 21 years older and he got fat. And he wasn't a hunter anymore. He was sitting around, and he kind of opened himself up to being an ish ohalot, a man of the tents, which was the description of his brother Jacob. And so he sort of morphs a little bit into the homebody that was Jacob. And I think the other reason he changes is that he loves his brother. There was never a moment when Esau didn't love Jacob. He was angry at him for stealing the birthright and manipulating him out of his hunger to buy the birthright for a pot of stew. But he loved his brother. Now, they were clearly fraternal twins. They weren't identical twins, but they were twins. And there's a bond between twins that scientists have explored. And fraternal twins are a little different than identical twins, but he loved him. So having him back was a good thing. And I think if you reflect on the families you've counseled who have had family fights, there's two choices, and really only two. At some point, someone with authority in the family has to say, enough. Enough. This fight ends now. Sort of Marlon Brando convening the five families in The Godfather. Or the second option is the family dies. You know, they split apart, and like planets that circle a now dead sun, they have no gravitational attraction and they just go spinning out into space on their own arc and on their own journey. And I think Esau understood that this was the moment when his family would either die or be reconstructed in a new way. And he was willing to forgive his brother. Was he willing completely? No. But was Jacob willing completely to get rid of his fear? No. Because after, when Esau says, come with me and we'll travel together, he said, no, I'll go this way. And
you go that way, right?
Exactly. So there's not a complete reconciliation in the sense of they're now, you know, exchanging Hanukkah cards, which of course hadn't happened yet. But
of course they did. Come on.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so fruitcake.
I know. So the fact of the matter is, I think Esau changed. That's what I would say it in a simple way.
So I have a homework assignment for you because you're the best writer of Midrash on the planet. And so here's the homework assignment. I think Esau changed too. And I love your idea that each of them found the part that was missing. In mythology, when a twin is born, he's only half a man. And when Isaac said to them, you know, the hands are the hands of Esau, but the voice is the voice of Jacob. That was the clue. You're each half a person. Esau knows how to do stuff in the world. Jacob, you just know how to talk. But Jacob, you know how to think, and Esau doesn't know how to think. And the two of you need to find that part of yourself. Esau found that part of himself, and Jacob found that part of himself. And that's what happens at that moment. But here's the other one. You've pointed this out to me before as well. What happens to Esau after that event? He goes and lives with Ishmael. So Marc, here's your homework. I know you love homework. I want you to write me a midrash about the conversation that Ishmael had with Esau. Son, I'm also the rejected one. And I can tell you something. You got two choices. You can spend your life being angry, feeling deprived, feeling cheated. You can spend your life focused entirely on what's been taken from you that was rightly yours. You can do that, and you will amount to nothing. It will eat you up. It will literally eat you up. Or you can make your peace with the blessing that was yours and enjoy it, and find that you do have a place in the world. You'll do this better, much better than anyone, much better than me, certainly. Tell me about what Father Ishmael, who's now an old man, says to the young Esau. For you. Says to the young Esau about getting over the resentments and the grievances and the sense of what was cheated, I was cheated out of, and finds peace in being who he is. Because that's the great question of the Torah. I mean, Genesis is a series of brother stories. Cain and Abel, the sons of Noah, Abraham and Lot, who's his brother's son, Isaac and Ishmael, Jacob and Esau, Joseph and his brothers. And then soon we're going to get Moses and Pharaoh. And all of them are based on this idea that you got the blessing and I didn't.
Yes. One chosen, one cast out.
Exactly. One chosen, one cast out. One blessed, one ignored. Right. And the question is, how do you find peace in such a system? Which, of course, is what the psalmist wrote. How incredibly rare it is when brothers can actually live together. But Ishmael teaches that. Ishmael teaches that truth to Esau. And what Ishmael said to Esau, that would be wonderful. I want to hear your reconstruction of that conversation. Okay?
You got it. And
for all of you out there who are watching this, if you've ever had that conversation with somebody, from either side, by the way, if you were the one who had the chip on your shoulder, or you were the one who had the rage in your heart, and someone sat you down and said, this isn't good for you. This isn't how you ought to live your life. Tell me about that. Or if you're the other one, if you were the wise one who sat down that young one and said, kid, let me tell you where you'll find blessing in this world, because you can go into the world being pissed off all you want, but that'll never bring you what you really want in your life. That conversation is so important, and it's completely implied here. It's not described. So I think we ought to find that, we ought to hear that conversation. We ought to hear that conversation. Marc, this week is Thanksgiving. Coming up next Shabbos is going to be Thanksgiving. Shabbos, Thanksgiving.
And Shabbos Hanukkah.
And Shabbos Hanukkah. Well, we'll be talking about that next week, of course. Give me a thought as I start basting my turkey, as I start chopping my green beans, as I start getting ready, my pumpkin pies ready for Thanksgiving.
Okay. So every year at Thanksgiving, I write a column, and we at our table go around, of course, and what are you thankful for? And I have rules that have changed the game. The rules are you can't say you're thankful for something that is banal and obvious. You can't say, I'm thankful for food, I'm thankful for my home, for my family. You got to think of something so weird. So the list is, think of something weird that you're thankful for on Thanksgiving. Weird, okay? And I've listed things in my column in the past years. Once I said I was thankful for squirrels. I won't go into the whole argument about that. This year, I was thankful for two things: olive trees and bees. I was thankful for the fact that olive trees are a kind of amazing superfruit. They're the oldest trees. They give olives when their trunks are all gnarly, and they give like wisdom from old people. And they give an oil, which is the best oil to use to cook, and their food. And the lamps in the temple were lit by olive oil. And olives are at the core of our culture. The second is bees. We have davash, eretz, chalav davash, and the honey that we have is another superfood that God has put into the world. It never rots. It never spoils. It's perfect food. And it is the reason that there's anything growing on earth, because the bees pollinate everything. And without their pollination, there's no fruiting of the fruit trees. And now there's a thing called sudden hive collapse, catastrophic hive collapse.
Yeah.
Where all of a sudden the bees just leave the queen and her attendants alone, and they fly away, and no one knows exactly why that happens. And so bees are very much endangered, and with the endangered bees, our whole planet is endangered. So those are my two Thanksgiving thoughts. I'm thankful for olives and bees, and that's the idea. That's what I think is my offering. What weird things are you thankful for?
Oh, that's a wonderful way to think. Be wonderful to bring that to the table with kids, because I'm sure kids will come up with some much more weird things than I will.
They will.
But I wasn't thinking weird things. I was actually thinking of what you spoke about last week. I'd like to be thankful for all the angels that have come into my life.
Oh, yeah.
The ones I've wrestled with, and the ones who have offered me blessings, and some of them have even wounded me. But these are angels that put me right when I needed to be put right, and picked me up when I needed to be picked up. And so this year I'm going to be thankful for angels. Thank you for everyone for watching this morning. I wish you a very good Shabbos, of course, following Torah study services live from Valley Beth Shalom with Rabbi Avi. It's a wonderful bat mitzvah. And we'll be back next week for Shabbos Thanksgiving and Shabbos Hanukkah. That'll be our conversation next week. And we wish you a very, very pleasant Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.